Hello, YouTube world. I wanted to make a Draw My Life With Me video because I wanted to share more of myself on YouTube, and I really want my channel to be a place of authenticity and a thing that inspires other people to really be more authentic and follow their dreams and just follow who they are. My YouTube channel is almost a year old. It right now is April, and I started doing YouTube last May, so it's been about 11 months, and then I posted my first video around June, if I'm not mistaken, so it's been about a year. And I thought that a Draw My Life video would be a good one because I'm saying my whole life story, so you guys will know pretty much my background. It's a good format for people to just share their life experience. We all have different lives and experience life differently, but with the same set of human emotions. So I think that's kind of funny that we all have the same set of emotions, but we all kind of experience life differently still, and we all have, different lives that we live and experience, but we get to share our life experiences on this platform and through different art mediums and expressions, and I think that's beautiful. I love being creative, and YouTube is definitely a creative outlet for me. I know that the internet and the world can be a judgmental place, and you never know how people are going to take things, but I'm not going to let that stop me, and I hope that you guys just see this as me just telling my life story on here. I've seen some Draw My Life videos where it's like 10 minutes, but this is gonna be a longer one. So let's start. So my parents met in Charleston, South Carolina in the 80s at a barbecue. And then I was conceived in the Bahamas. And basically the way my mom told me this is that they were hanging out, and then they just decided that they wanted to have a kid because they wanted to have a family of their own. So they conceived me right away. That's what my mom told me while they were on vacation in the Bahamas, right after they decided that. And then they got married in Palm Beach. They were living with my great-grandfather at that point in time. And my dad planned the wedding, and they promptly got married. And my mom gave birth to me at St. Mary's Medical Center in West Palm Beach. And then when I was 2 months old, we moved to Connecticut, which I don't really remember that. And then we moved to Massachusetts. I'm not sure if we moved straight to my childhood home in Massachusetts, or if there was another home in Massachusetts and then we moved to my childhood home. But that was like the best house growing up. It was at the end of this long avenue with about 4 other houses on it, and it was deep in the woods. So New England and Massachusetts is heavily wooded. So it was a great place for me as an only child to go out and play. It was very idyllic. I loved growing up in New England. At the time, I didn't realize I was having like such an idyllic childhood, but looking back, I totally realized that. We actually had a playground with the neighbors that our families kind of paid for together. My neighbors were around my age too, to the house right next to us. But since I was an only child, I did have a lot of time to myself, just wandering around outside in the woods, going to the playground, or I would fill out workbooks. I really liked doing workbooks. My father worked as an accountant. There was a lot of love in my family. My father worked actually for my great-grandfather and his buddies. They were starting a business where, how when you go to a hotel and the hotel has its own TV channel that has information about the hotel? Well, they were kind of starting one of the first versions of that back in the 90s. So that's kind of where I get my love for business ideas and starting new random ideas is definitely for my great-grandfather. But the thing is, my dad really did not like working as an accountant. He preferred to be an artist or a handyman, and my dad would actually go to the beach and collect all this stuff like buoys and shells, and then he'd glue it to a piece of plywood, and it turned out to be like a big picture. Like all the pieces that he collected from the beach were all kind of like pixels in a bigger picture. So he really liked doing creative art and doing handyman stuff, and he really did not like being an accountant. Actually, both my parents were alcoholics, but I never knew that my mom was an alcoholic until I was an adult. But I always knew that my dad kind of was an alcoholic, and his alcoholism started getting bad after we moved to Massachusetts. Throughout my childhood, he was gone half the time because he was going to treatment centers, or he would go to the Bahamas to get sober, or at one point he actually got a choice from a judge if he's going to go to a treatment center or he could go to prison, and he didn't want to go to a treatment center again, so then he went to prison, and then he really regretted that. When he was home, he would be like mowing the lawn, and he had a snowplow with a big red pickup truck, and he was doing that. And I remember he was real, like, you know how dads are so fun. Like, I remember I was riding with him in the truck, and he was like, okay, now you steer, like, tell me where to go. And I didn't really know left and right. And then he would like drive into the woods a little bit, and it was like really silly. He was a really fun dad. But when he was gone half of the time to get sober, I missed him so much. And I remember there were a lot of birthday parties where I was just wishing that he was there. I don't remember that he made it to any of my birthday parties. But most of the time, you know, kids are so present, so most of the time I was having a really good time. My mom took me to a music class with this music teacher, Sarah Moran, and we're still friends to this day. Sarah Moran's like in her 80s, and then at this Unitarian church we went to, I had another friend named Sarah who's my exact age, and we're also still friends. And school came really easily, probably because I enjoyed doing workbooks so much in my free times. And then when I was around 5 years old, my parents started to get a divorce that lasted until I was 7. When I was 7, it was finalized. But at the time that my parents were getting divorced, I remember I kind of blamed my mom because I could tell that she was kind of divorcing my dad, and I didn't really want them to split up, of course. But then later I found out that, you know, why my parents got a divorce was my dad had cheated on my mom after he was gone for half of the time, and my mom had been loyally waiting for my dad and raising me. When my dad cheated on my mom in our family home, that was like the last straw for my mom, which I think is totally understandable. I started to become aware of my family's financial struggles for the first time when my parents started getting a divorce, which is pretty common. So I would hear my mom cuss out this trustee on the phone. So I've always been kind of honest that I do have a trust fund, and I was always kind of raised to never ever tell anybody that. But I don't like the feeling that I'm hiding something. But the thing is that we had this trustee, this guy who controlled our entire financial life, and basically I would hear my mom cussing him out on the phone. So I remember that was like really upsetting to me. I remember that also with our home in Massachusetts, I wasn't really allowed to go out on the deck because it was rotting and falling off of the house. We weren't allowed to have access to the money to replace it. Yeah, I started to get a little bit worried about money for the first time because yeah, my mom fighting and the way the house was kind of falling apart. But most of the time it was still good because, kids are so much in the present, and we did have a very idyllic New England life, so most of the time it was chill. And then when I was 6, I think that my parents' divorce was like almost finalized, but by the time I was 6, it was pretty much like things were kind of settled. And my dad moved back to New England. I think he was gone to get sober again. And he moved to Boston, and he was doing really well. That summer, my dad and I went on my grandpa's boat, which is designed like a lobster boat. And we spent, I think, a couple weeks on there all together, and that was a really good memory. In Boston, my dad had a girlfriend named Stacy, and I am still in touch with Stacy. She and I just talked yesterday. The people in New England are very real people, I think. They have a tough exterior, but I made some really good friends there. And when my dad lived in Boston, this was kind of my big experience of the city when I was a kid. He lived on top of, I think, a 5-story walk-up. So he walked up the set of stairs and he had the top unit. And then it was overlooking the Boston Commons. And at this point, my dad didn't have a driver's license anymore due to his alcoholism. We would walk all around Boston. I would go visit him every other weekend, and we would go to the fairs, or he would take me to this little restaurant, and I would get clam chowder and a Shirley Temple. Just walking around Boston was the best, and he would take me to Starbucks, or most of the time in the morning he would go down and get some hot chocolate for us and then bring it back up. And to this day, if I take my son to a Starbucks, it reminds me of my dad and me at Starbucks. So yeah, that was a good time. Things were going smoothly. I remember my great-grandfather gave me a Game Boy Advance for Christmas that year. My dad and Stacy and I went skiing at Mount Tokimo for a weekend. I think my dad didn't tell my mom that we were going out of the state, though, and my mom was a little bit freaked out because of that, I remember. My dad's mom came to visit, and we had lunch together, and my dad told me that she reported that he seemed drunk, because sometimes in court, if someone who's close does that, then it will get taken seriously. And I just knew that my dad wasn't drunk, but that was just really hurtful that she would try to hurt him like that in court. She and I don't really have the best relationship. So then my dad wanted to move to Scituate, and everyone kind of told him not to, but my dad wanted to live on the beach, and he loved the beach so much. Although he was doing well in the city, I guess it didn't resonate with him as much as the beach. It was a little bit of a tough decision for him to go to Scituate because, like I said, he doesn't have a driver's license, and that's a lot easier to deal with if you live in a walking area, and Scituate isn't really a walking area. His girlfriend Stacy would drive us around. So yeah, the beach was obviously really fun. And then he would do this funny thing where he would make us these really delicious barbecues, and he'd say, let's see if the charcoal fairy came. And then there would be a bag of charcoal on the front doorstep. And he'd be like, the charcoal fairy dropped it off. And as a kid, I actually believed that the charcoal fairy brought us charcoal, which was really cute. I was also kind of becoming aware of money issues, back before my dad's alcoholism started getting bad again. He was kind of telling me oh, I shouldn't go to summer camp, I should just stay home. So that was also, I remember that conversation, and it kind of making me aware of oh, maybe I shouldn't be spending the money to go to summer camp or something. So my dad was a very attractive man, kind of with movie star qualities. And there was this one neighbor who had a crush on him, and she actually started giving him alcohol I kind of think that if it wasn't for that woman, then my dad may not have started drinking again. Like, he was doing well for a long time, and to just like bring alcohol to a really bad alcoholic without them asking or anything, that was a pretty evil thing to do. At the mall, my dad was really drunk one time, and he was running up the down escalator and just really belligerently, and I was so mortified and embarrassed, and that was one of the last times I saw him. Then when we got home after the mall incident, I remember he was trying to help me like get ready for bed, I guess, and he was like taking my shirt off to help me like get ready to take a shower or something, but my shirt had a button, and he wasn't undoing the button, and the hole was like too small for my head unless the button was undone, and it was like hurting me, but he didn't realize because he was drunk, I guess, and he was getting really angry, and I think I must have been really frustrated and just upset and freaked out, and I wanted to call my mom, and my dad was just really angry about that. I did call my mom, and she came to pick me up. I think when my dad like went to open the door to give my mom my like allergy medicine, the door was locked, and I think my mom like forgot to unlock the door, and then she just like rolled down the window for him to hand it to her, and he like hit her in the head with a bag of medicine, and that was the last time that I saw my dad. So my dad lost custody of that because he hit my mom in front of me. So I didn't really see him after that. And then in the fall, after school started, I think it was October, and I was riding home on the school bus. And the school bus dropped me off at the top of the avenue, and then I was walking home and with my neighbors who went to the same school and their mom, and then there were like a bunch of police cars at my house. My neighbor was kind of like, "What's going on?" I was like, "I don't know," and I went inside, and there were a bunch of like police people like sitting with my mom. And it wasn't, the first time the police had been over. I think it was the second time that I remember. I think my parents got into a fight once when I was like 3 years old, and I just like hid under a sheet, but they kind of had to just check on me to make sure I was okay. They just said, your dad died, and I think I was in shock, and I just went to the playground, and my neighbor was like, "What happened?" I was just like, "My dad died," and I started crying, and they're like, "Okay, maybe you should go home." So then I just went back inside, and I just remember being kind of confused because on the school bus, I remember I sat next to someone that no one else was sitting next to, and I just sat next to her, and I was being friendly, and I was just kind of confused about how my day could go from going well and doing something good like that, and then something so tragic happens. So I was pretty confused at the time about that. We already had a golden retriever at my mom's house. We always had big dogs, and we had a cat. And then when my dad passed, then I inherited a couple of rats, and my dad also had a snake, but the snake already passed away because of a storm where the ocean broke through the windows and flooded my dad's rental house, and the snake got so cold that it died. I remember my mom, I guess she didn't want the rats because she said she let them out for some sun and they ran away, but basically my mom took them out of their cage and put them out in the yard, and then they just ran away. So that was also pretty sad for me. When my dad passed away, my mom was just like listening to Dido on repeat until I would ask her to stop. I think I was definitely healing faster than she was, and my mom was getting really depressed basically. My mom thought we should move to Florida because her family is in Florida. My dad passed away in October, and then in the winter we moved to Florida. At first I was excited when we were looking at the houses because in Florida there's a lot of new homes, and to a little kid they're like really exciting to look at. But then when it was actually time to move and the moving truck was there and like we already moved out all of our stuff, I remember like I wanted to hold on to the walls because I really didn't want to leave. But I knew that there wasn't going to be really like much of a choice at that point, and I think we might have already sold the house at that point. I remember having the urge to like hold on to the walls because I really didn't want to move. And then there was another really weird thing that happened after my dad passed away. When my mom decided to move to Florida, remember I said that there was the neighbor who gave my dad alcohol, and then his alcoholism got bad again after that? Well, I'm telling you, that woman was so obsessed with my dad that she actually bought my childhood home from my mom. And then my mom was also dating a guy at the time who was pretty weird, and he forged my dad's signature to sell it to that lady without my mom knowing. And my mom actually broke up with her boyfriend because of that, but they ended up getting back together. Then when we moved to Florida, I actually started having like more grief because then I really missed home back in Massachusetts. And I had a lot of culture shock because in Massachusetts, the town that I was in, Cohasset, there were 7,000 people. And the town we moved to, Parkland, I went to an elementary school that had 2,000 kids. In Massachusetts, there's a lot of woods, and in South Florida, there's a lot of urban sprawl, and there's hardly any nature. So that really freaked me out the most, honestly. And then the kids were really different. Like, I remember a frog went into our classroom one day and a kid stabbed it with a pencil, and that really freaked me out. I started to kind of get bullied, and I didn't really make any friends at my new school besides like a couple people that I kind of just hung out with because I didn't really have anyone else to hang out with. It wasn't really like a real friendship. I would just kind of like read books or hang out with the teacher. I was also kind of like behind in math because in Massachusetts we were just starting to learn multiplication, but then in Florida they had just like finished multiplication. I remember my mom was like really upset that I wasn't like prepared for the Florida school system. So honestly, moving felt a lot harder and even less natural than my dad dying because I felt like I was kind of like going through the natural grief process and was kind of healing from that. And then moving was like, I always wanted to go back to New England after that.